In other words, we have a mandate to create wealth and to bring increase to what's in our hand. Gold and silver are brokers of wealth building for the sons. They facilitate for us from heaven to earth, as they are the only money we have that God made on the earth ever. Honor is an action verb to me, Joseph. It's living. It moves us to do things that may not even make sense, but it has to count for something. It can't just be a feeling, because that's how kings live. There's a priestly component to our life on the earth as kings and priests that requires of us to operate the way kings do.
Welcome to the Fuse Life podcast, where we are all about your God-given purpose, assignments, and what it looks like to have heaven flowing in and through you. My guest today is someone that I highly admire. We've spent a couple of years getting to know each other, and obviously, he has an amazing track record of his life. He's served as a Green Beret in Cyprus. That's a very high level of soldier. He's an international motivational speaker and author. He's written 2 books that radically impacted my life, Weaponised Honor and Tables and Platforms. So what you're going to find is I've put a link in there where you can get his resources, and I highly recommend you grab his resources, and then you'll find out why in the next hour or 2 hours, right? He works with businesses, governments, law enforcement, ministries, and the military. And he's working as a consultant with high-level people, professionally and personally. He owns a bunch of LLCs. He's a part of some organizations, and he's happily married with 3 grown children. And along with all of this, I have to say he's a man of integrity, a man of honor, and a very amazing communicator. So, Marius, I just want to thank you so much for being here this morning.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I am so excited for this conversation because your content and you came into my life at such a significant moment where you spoke about subjects that I didn't hear many people talk about, like the importance of relationship, like fame. You know, most people that I'd met just would say fame is just a very bad thing and you run from it. And just even how you talk about being concealed and revealed highly impacted my life. So thank you so much.
Appreciate that.
So why don't we start here for those that don't know you, just a little bit about you, what you're doing and where you are.
Yeah, I'm coming at you live right now from Connecticut. And I want to say a huge thank you to Joseph for having me on and for the kind words. And also appreciate the friendship over the years that we've developed. I think it's more than 2 years. I think it's 3.
Yes.
That we've journeyed together, and we've had calls several times a year. They're always very impactful for me. It's always a give and take. And I always appreciate the way you love people, Joseph, even though I don't know the people you care for or coach or mentor or journey with. I can always tell you love them. And I think love is such an important, perhaps the most critical part of ministry that's often absent, because we push for so many things of impact and we forget to love people. But I can tell you love people. And that means a lot to me. And thanks for the friendship, the relationship. Like I said to you before we even came on, because we've journeyed together, this is easy for me. And I'm really looking forward to it. I live in Connecticut. My wife, Danielle, and I live in a home we bought a few years ago. Our children are all moved out. Our daughter's finishing her last year of university, and she's most likely going to live near where she's going to school right now, near Boston. So we are very happy to just have 3 dogs here that guard the property and give us company. And we're loving life. We get to travel together a little bit. We just got back from California, had a series of very powerful meetings in Northern California.
Wow.
And we're very happy to be doing what we do. Danielle's in the corporate world, and I do a lot of what you shared earlier, Joseph. So thank you.
That's amazing. You know, I know that you are a man who loves to read books and you spend a lot of time in books. Has that always been the case? Or what happened there in that learning journey that you're so hungry to always learn and develop and grow?
Yeah, my parents gave me an incentive to give me money if I read books. And I was by the age of 10 years old, I had read the Iliad and the Odyssey more than 3 times each.
Wow.
These were versions that in the Greek world were not too wordy. They had pictures with them, so they were easier to follow. But I became wrapped up in the Iliad and the Odyssey at a young age, to the point that when I took a course in college, a very high level course on Athenian history to be exact, and the Iliad and the Odyssey were a big part of that course, I was able to have a perspective that came from those things being woven into my DNA because I had read those books so many times that something really astonishing happened after I took that exam. But I read a book. I read a book every month, and I got my allowance doing that. And then I had an aunt who was very wealthy and a doctor who's still alive and still asking me, "What did you read?" And she also motivated me financially to read books. And maybe that was wrong, but I also motivated my kids to read books. If they read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, for example, they got $100 if they could answer simple questions to prove they read the book. And now I read at least one book a week.
Wow.
And I learn from books. It's the way I'm wired. Others don't. And others that I journey with very closely on public platforms don't read at all. And it's okay. But that's how I learn. Yeah.
Amazing. And so growing up in Cyprus, when did you encounter the Lord, or were you in a Christian home? What was that journey like?
Yeah, everyone's Christian in that part of the world. Nobody will claim not to be Christian, but it's Orthodox Christianity and very nominal at that. And my parents had exposure to evangelical Christian circles, and we did for a season mingle with some evangelicals in Cyprus. However, there was a falling out that my father had with one of the leaders. And after that, they pretty much encouraged us to have nothing to do with organized religion. So my parents were mavericks in that regard. They didn't go to any church. They didn't get involved with any spiritual activity. And neither did we. So I didn't have God. I hadn't even thought of the word God, to be honest with you, Joseph, at all throughout my teenage years and my young adulthood through the Green Berets. It was only after I finished the Green Beret training and service, when I got to the US in my first year of college, about 6 months in, I had an encounter in a dream where I met Yahweh. And that's how I came to know him, is through that encounter.
Wow. You know, I so value and honor your insight, so I'm throwing some questions here and there, but
Sure.
I always wondered, and many people wonder, why some people have these kind of encounters. What are your thoughts on that? Like, I've podcasted a guy and he said Jesus just walked into his room when he was, watching TV at 6 years old, something like that. And, some people seem to have these kind of encounters. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't know what qualifies someone to have an encounter, and I don't understand why everyone doesn't. At the same time, what's most important to me is to steward well the encounters I have, rather than to wish for ones I didn't have, or to compare myself to the encounters others have had. Those are some treacherous paths we could take, or slippery slopes if we can start to compare ourselves to someone else, or if we start to evaluate what we want versus what we've gotten. I always live from a place of gratitude for what has already happened. So any encounter I have to steward and bring to fruition and manifest it, assimilate it into my being, and live out of it, rather than look for the next one. And honestly, the fewer the better as far as I'm concerned. Because it's work.
Yeah. And that's a side of this that I guess many people don't talk about, that you are stewarding what just happened, right? Not just enjoying a small experience. That's amazing.
And sometimes these encounters, I don't know how safe we are to go mystical here.
Yeah, we're good.
So the first encounter I had, obviously in our Father's world, for anyone that's here thinking we talk to the dead, we don't. But once we go through the veil of the body of Christ into our Father's world, which we have access to, not just when we die, but now living out of both worlds here, this is the way Abraham lived, the way Solomon, we're going to talk about him, I hope, in a little bit. So the first time I encountered Melchizedek, this was after years of pressing in to understand his role and his function in governing over the treasuries of heaven, and looking for insight from heaven in my life, and particularly for the one who handles the resources and the finances. And after years of pressing in, I had my first encounter, and he was dressed like a banker. He didn't look like some kind of figure with flowing robes and garments and a long beard. He didn't look like that. I have encountered him that way, but the first time I encountered him, he looked like a businessman. He was seated at a desk and he was poring over documents, contracts to be exact. And when I walked in, he just turned his head ever so slightly to acknowledge that he knew someone was in the room, but he had not yet even looked at me. And I stood there in this realm and I just beheld what he was doing. And he turned his head a little more than the first time and nodded. Joseph, it took me 1 month to recover from that nod. Like every time I thought of it, I broke down and wept. It was a nod of approval for what I was pressing into, much of which I'm still benefiting from today, that I really needed that approval from him, from that world, from my father's world. So some people have questioned me whether that was Melchizedek or that was Jesus or the Lord. It doesn't matter. All I know is it transformed my life. I know it was Melchizedek because I've confirmed it, but I also didn't just jump onto what's the next thing. I needed a month just to process that. And every day I would go back there in terms of engaging with what had happened, not the actual encounter, because I couldn't get back into that realm just like that. But I would go back into what happened in that room and why did it impact me and what was I to steward from it. So all this to say, these are not flippant things for me. I take them very seriously. I know many listening to us and getting the recording are in that space as well. We are stewards of everything, owners of nothing. When something's given to us, we have to grow it.
Wow, that's amazing. And just any kind of advice or tips for someone who's practically wanting to press in or wanting to now go back to some things that have happened and they're realizing I could have stewarded this better. Any practical advice on what they could do with that?
So good. I would say the same thing I would say in terms of developing a friendship or getting on someone's platform, like even yours, Joseph, which is a significant platform as far as I'm concerned. It didn't come from me desiring to be on it. I didn't even know all of what you were doing actually until you revealed it to me. But it was through the relationship we have together that this has come forth, right? It's the same thing with encounter. We can never pursue encounter for the sake of encounter. We pursue Yahweh, we pursue the Lord, and we love him. We adore him. We worship him in spirit and truth, and we want just that. If something comes of it because of his sovereignty, which going back to your earlier question, how do these things happen? Who do they happen to? And I believe that's where the sovereignty of Yahweh comes in. It's not something I can just call at will to have an encounter. Now, some who are very experienced in those realms, who have even have an assignment to map the spirit world for us, if you would, like the cartographers of the spirit realm, if we could say that, I believe they could get into encounter because they've navigated certain paths through which they go into certain places. But for most people, I think we have to just press into relationship and let the Lord orchestrate the events that bring us into encounter. Again, with the encounter not being the objective.
That is so good. That's amazing. There's so many subjects here, but we talked about Solomon, and we're looking into Solomon today. We're looking into honor. And before we go into that, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the purpose of wealth in the kingdom. Yeah. We have obviously seen it being misused or abused, like abnormally used all over the place. And I'd love to know your thoughts on that. What do you think is the purpose of wealth in the kingdom?
Yeah, it says in the word that you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the power to create wealth. Deuteronomy, I believe it's 8:18. So it says, you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the power to create wealth. So first of all, we could never be condemned for something that God gave us power to accomplish. So for those who think pursuing wealth building is wrong, just the first part of that verse proves them wrong. But there's another part to the verse that's even more powerful in terms of why we should be wealth builders. So the first part of the verse says, you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the power to create wealth, comma, that he may fulfill the promise that he made to your fathers as it is this day. In other words, the covenant God made with Abraham gets fulfilled not by God himself doing something all the time, but through the wealth building process he ushers us into and the power he gives us to be successful in it.
That is so good.
In other words, we have a mandate to create wealth and to bring increase to what's in our hand, whatever that may be. It could be a stick, it could be $1 million, it could be $1 billion, it could be $1 trillion. It doesn't matter. Whatever he puts in our hand, he gives us the power to increase it. Why? Because by us growing in wealth, he fulfills his promise to Abraham, because that promise was what? Ultimately, what does it come down to? Through you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. And of course, we only see a glimmer of what that manifestation looks like in the reign of Solomon, when the kings of the earth were all coming to him. And just as in the case of the Queen of Sheba going back with more than what she brought to Solomon, we believe that happened over and over and over again. So resources were coming from the nations to honor what was happening in Israel, and especially Israel's King Solomon. But Solomon, out of his own treasury even, sent many of them, if not all of them, back with more to bring blessing to their nations. So there it is. The promise God made to Abraham now starting to have come into fruition. Through you, the families of the earth will be blessed.
That is so good. Were you always attuned to this, open to abundance, open to wealth? What was it like in your journey as you walked into this more and more?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that question, because it's something I've come to terms with and started talking about these last couple of years. I grew up in a family that was upper middle class, I would say middle class to upper middle class, but I had elements in my family, which is primarily my aunt, who was a very successful doctor and wealthy, who brought a certain refinement into our family because of the circles she navigated, being a medical doctor in a land where being a medical doctor is a big deal. And so she was able to come out of the poverty environment that she was raised in, with my grandparents having very little, being cheated of their inheritance, some bad things that went down. And she and her sister were able to rise above that, becoming very successful doctors. My parents were educators. And because of my aunt's influence in our family, we were all able to come into contact with things that the wealthy had, the wealthy did, and mindsets the wealthy would engage with. And so as a young man, as a young boy, actually, I was able to start noticing things that were different in wealthy circles. And I was very interested in it, not knowing where that was leading me or why it was. But every time I asked a question, it was as though I was getting shut down. For example, my aunt and I were behind a BMW one day at a light, and I said, "What brand of car is that?" And she said, "Oh, that is a BMW." And I said, "I really like their logo." And and she said, "Well, that is for the wealthy. That is not." My parents drove Fiats. It's an Italian car, and so did my aunt. They all bought Fiats. They had, I don't know, they didn't have stock in Fiat, but if they did, we would have been even more well off. So we all had Fiats my whole life growing up, because they would say Fiat is a good car. Fiat is a very good car, reliable and safe. I don't know if it was or not, but I don't know. We always had Fiat. But
there's a lot of. Sorry, I was just going to say there's a lot of Fiats in India. So growing up, I've seen a few of them. So yes.
Okay, so Fiat, Seat, those were Italian companies. But anyway, we're behind this BMW. I asked her about it. She tells me, and I said, "Well, one day I'm gonna have a BMW." So when the family got together for the next meal, my aunt raised the issue, and she said, "You know, we were behind a BMW the other day. We would always go on these picnics to these locations that, you know, up in the mountains and things like that." And she raised the issue in a very admonishing way, not an exhortational way, and said Marios was questioning what car it was, and I showed him a BMW, and he said he's going to have one. And everybody started laughing and saying, no, those things are for the rich. You know, settle down, calm down. You're not going to do that. So there were things like this that I would notice. I found out about Mont Blanc pens, and that some of them had a diamond in them. And I became intrigued about that and said, well, why can't we have that? And they said, because BIC, B-I-C, the pen company, they make fine pens. And I'd rather buy 12 BICs for $12 than one Mont Blanc for hundreds of dollars. You don't need that. And I would say, yes, I do. Because I want to have that, and I want to sign with the best pen I could possibly have, because it communicates about me. So as a young boy, I was a maverick. I was an unconventional thinker within my family about financial matters. And I always gravitated to the rich. My friends, some of the best friends I had in my childhood were the rich ones, whose parents had really good jobs, or who had investments, or who were trust fund kids, or whatever. And I was always criticized by my family. To this day, bro, to this day, they will bring that up and say, yeah, you always had to hang around with the rich, you and the rich people. And at some point I had to break it to them that I'm also doing well,
Yeah. Wow, what a journey. This is so good for everyone who is like you, maybe grew up in a different situation and feels like wealth is not for them. Can you think of a certain, maybe one or two stories where you really push through a limiting belief, like these ones where it's only for the wealthy? Is there anything that you can share on that, where you pushed through and how you came out the other side?
Yeah, so we when we entered ministry, we entered a poverty level income. Danielle and I can tell you what it was. It was $15,000 a year each. It was our starting income. And so it was a few $100 a week. We're trying to make ends meet. Then we had Christos 2 years after we got married. We got married in 96, 98. Christos came, and we were living in a church parsonage. We were serving as associate leaders.
Wow.
Meager circumstances. So our cash flow was very low, and we didn't have much. Sure, we had families we could fall back on, but we've never asked them for anything. And we also didn't want to bring reproach to the kingdom or to the ministry by showing them that we weren't making it, though they did know that. So in 1999, I decided we're going to eliminate all our debts, and we had some credit card debt, and we were just struggling. And we, through some circumstances that happened and somebody putting in my hand a very good plan by which we could build our savings account and eventually start to invest, I was able to eliminate the debt and then to start building. And in 2003, I went to a softball game, a church softball game, and someone, a wealth builder that was coming just to watch his wife's brother, he came and handed me a book, and it was Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I read that book in 2 days, and it was, other than the Bible, no book has ever had a greater impact on me than that. Well, maybe the Iliad, but that's a whole other story. So anyway, I read that book, and I was riveted by it. And I learned the difference between assets and liabilities. And I decided I'm going to have assets in all the asset categories, which we now do. But at that point, we had nothing. And I decided I'm going to chart my course towards acquiring all assets in all the categories that Robert Kiyosaki names in the book as assets. And I'm going to eliminate as many of these liabilities, even though it wasn't hard to do because we didn't have ski-doos and sea-doos and doodads and the things he criticized us so much because we were broke. When I told my pastor about it, I was under a very oppressive regime, and things only got worse as time went on with him. He discouraged me. You asked me about limitation. He said, you need to keep your mind on the Lord and on the things of God and on your responsibilities here. He actually raised an issue about something I'd forgotten to do, like something minor that would have never come up had I not shown interest in something other than ministry. And he shut me down. And then I expressed an interest in real estate after I read Robert Kiyosaki's third book, which was The Rich Dad's Guide to Investments, which I highly recommend because he goes towards real estate in that one. And that book rocked my world because I remember weeping through so much of it. It was really powerful for me. The second one was the Cash Flow Quadrant. I also recommend that. And so I went back to him and I said, you have real estate investments, Pastor. You own different houses. You always talk about them in your sermons. These are things you've said publicly. I'm really interested in buying one of the houses the church is selling. So the church owned a bunch of properties and they were going to sell one. So I said, I would be interested in coming up with an agreement for that house. And the fact that I lifted my head to believe that I could buy that house cost me dearly. Some spears came my way. He publicly ridiculed me about it. It was really bad. Danielle could vouch for me on this one. Like, it got really bad. Wow. So there was limitation over me, which I recognized as an antichrist spirit. I'm not saying an antichrist in me, the hope of glory as a wealth builder spirit rose up against me to shut me down. So that was one instance. And of course, growing up, I had those challenges. And then every step of the way, any limitation or challenge that I would face in particular investment vehicles or particular directions I would move in or businesses I would invest in or start, there would always be this voice saying, who do you think you are? And it comes from within. It wasn't from out there now. It had become internal, where I'm hearing this voice, who do you think you are? You've lost your bearings. You've lost your mooring. Your parents raised you well, and look at you. You're trying to become rich. All these things. And I had to overcome that.
Man, this is so good. I don't know if you're okay to go into a little bit of how someone could overcome these voices that once were external and now have become internal.
Yes. So I'm a soldier. You mentioned my Green Beret service. And as a soldier, we all are in the kingdom, especially those of us that are believing about a realm we can access from this life. That's the special forces, I believe, of heaven. And so as a soldier, I have responsibilities. I have tasks. I have assignments. I have orders. And if my orders are clearly to steward and to bring increase to what is in my hand, those orders supersede any feeling, emotion, or voice. I will set my face like a flint. And I've always been able to overcome because I am responsible to get this through, to get this across the line. So that's really helped me. Another way has been to dig in the word and to look for those who were able to bring increase to what was in their hand, and to have a proper understanding biblically of how the Lord sees us as wealth builders. And I understand that some are listening to us right now and you don't have much. You're in environments that don't offer you many possibilities to grow into great wealth. I understand that. But I do believe every one of us can take what's in our hand and make the most of it. That's what I'm talking about. So I would go in the word and I would look for things that would inspire me, or I would read books, or I would read stories of those who went from nothing to something, of those who lost everything and rebuilt it. Again, the books, the stories, even movies, that were inspiring to me of how someone would overcome financial difficulties, and it would realign me. It wasn't always the Lord. And I need to emphasize this, Joseph. Many people that are believers like us, they think that our source of information or inspiration or education should be mostly from spiritual sources. It's a Christian movie. It's a Christian book. I don't believe that. Elijah was fed by the bird that was unclean, and they were not allowed to eat, the raven. When he was running from Jezebel, the raven fed him. So if the bird that he couldn't eat was feeding him, I can receive from some ravens that may not profess faith in Christ the way we do, or may not at all, or may claim to be something totally different, even vile. But if there is substance in their lives and integrity, which you mentioned earlier, which is very important to me, and a track record of growth in what they put their hand to, I can listen to what they have to say, and I can eat the meat and spit out the bones. And so I would go to these sources. Like, for example, Ray Dalio is by no stretch a Christian. He would not admit that. He would never side with us. But his books, Principles, Ray Dalio's Principles, and Principles for How to Deal with a Changing World Order are two of the most fundamental books for anyone who wants to seriously build wealth by understanding world markets, world movements, shifts, and so on. And those books have rocked my world and have challenged me beyond what I was challenged even in the Bible as a wealth builder, to be really honest, because somehow the Lord highlighted some things through principles that came out of someone that in a way was a raven. I say that respectfully toward Mr. Dalio. If he's listening, I'm sure he's not.
That's amazing. That is so good. And I have found the same in my journey, and I've had to keep a lot of this quiet for a while. When I was part of a church and I was an associate pastor and leading people, it was something that I had to be very careful about because people get worried. And so to hear you say this and the way you said it, it's amazing. Hey guys, I want to say something again here. Like, I am just touching on subjects with Marius, but as you can hear, he's deep waters, and there is so much that you can glean from his resources. Okay, I have never plugged any person like I am plugging this man, and will continue to, because there are single messages that he has on his website that could transform your life radically. And then obviously the books, there are stories he goes into of his journey. And I really value the candidness, the openness, the vulnerability in all the content. So I highly recommend you get that. And so, Marius, we're going into Solomon's journey.
Joseph, can I say something real quick about the books? I wanted to highlight a book that I wrote that was actually a bestseller for quite a while, but is the most misunderstood book. And I think I just felt to say this. The book Sexy Laundry is probably, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of writing, it's the best writing I've done. I think it's brilliantly laid out, and it's all about the empowerment of women by putting a spotlight on the Proverbs 31 woman. Yes. And I was just recently with an amazing woman who is a rancher and is doing incredible things. And I asked her about it, and she said, no, I haven't read it. And this wasn't her case, but a lot of people don't pick it up because it says sexy in it. And Sexy Laundry, if you don't Google it, just trust me on that. But I want to say it has nothing to do with sex or laundry. There's a reason why the title is that, but you won't know it till the end of the book. So I build a story as I'm also writing concepts and principles, and I build a story in each chapter that comes to culmination at the very end of the book. That's why I think it was brilliantly written. But I want to encourage especially women who are entrepreneurial, women who are trailblazers, pioneers, who are empowered by their husbands, by their families to go for it. This is about you. You will find yourself in the book. And if you're a woman who has limitation over your life, this will set something straight, and maybe buy it for your husband to put him in his place. I just wanted to mention that out of all the things, I actually narrated on my site, and I personally narrate that book and Tables and Platforms and Weaponized Honor. And all the proceeds from my books, by the way, just go to support things that I'm passionate about. This isn't about enriching myself. So thank you for plugging that, Joseph. I appreciate it.
Oh, this is so good. I don't know, but you probably don't know this, but I buy your bundles for people and send it to them. Put the email address, and I'm like, you need this bundle, because in these bundles, there's so much gold. I want to ask you this question. Some of the pricing that you have on there, like $777 or $444, like what's the thought process behind the numbers there?
Yeah, some of the numbers are very important to me. The 3 sevens are, of course, if we engage with the Hebrew numerics, the 7 is Zayin. And I find this Zayin having a very important role in my life, as it's like, it means weapon. It also means to scatter and to cut off the enemy and things like that. So I find it very interesting. Sometimes we go 777, 3 Zayins. So it's all in the numerics. But now we just bundled everything into 6. We have 6 different bundles, including the ultimate access. This just got done, and I have QR codes that I now bring when I go to different conferences. And I was so excited about it, Joseph, because I thought I'm getting high tech, and I told my wife, and just kind of rolling her eyes and laughing, because she's like, you just now figured out QR codes. Cyprus, she calls me Cyprus sometimes. So she's like, Cyprus, you just figured out the QR code thing. Congratulations. It's so funny.
I would love to know how you and Danielle met.
We were working at a restaurant together. She had been working there before I got there. And when I was going through grad school, the owner was Greek. I had got in there with some friends to eat. And when our waitress told us that the owner was Greek, I applied for a job because I was going to need a job. And I started working there. And Danielle was sometimes my manager, still is. And sometimes we waited tables together. She was in a long-term relationship at the time with someone, and I was in a long-term relationship with someone else. But we both kind of broke up with our respective boyfriend, girlfriend, and then we ended up getting together not long after that. And 6 months later, we were married.
Wow. And how many years has that been now?
20. It'll be 29 this April.
29. Amazing. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
So cool.
If we have a chance later, we can touch on some things that help our marriage.
Yeah, that would be great. And we could go there now if you want. Or we could go there later.
We just have a really good sense of humor in our marriage. And I just wanted to draw attention to it because of what I said earlier, but she said Cyprus, like the sarcasm, the fun, the banter is something that brings a lot of life to our marriage. And one of the things we did a few years ago, sometimes a spouse does something the other person is annoyed with. and you do it over and over. Like, why did you leave your clothes on the floor? How many times do I have to tell you, pick up your clothes? That kind of thing. So one time, one of us had done something like that and, left dirty dishes in the sink or whatever it was. And instead of saying, why did you do that? And going down this path that never leads anywhere good, we exaggerated the opposite by saying, hey, do me a favor. Can you get all the dishes and pile them in the sink? Or could you take all your clothes out of your closet and put them on the floor? And one time when we were in London, being jet lagged, waking up very early in the morning for an assignment, Danielle turned on the bathroom light in the hotel room. And, everything is so close together there. So that light was really bright. And it woke me up. And I said, babe, I think Wembley Stadium isn't too far from here. Can you call them and bring one of the huge spotlights and shine that in my face? So we diffuse the frustration that could come by bringing humor into it. We watch a lot of comedy together. We practice our stand-up routines with each other for when we speak. And I have to say, laughing together is very, very special to us. Recently, I had a day when I had so much going well for me in one day. I don't know if you ever had those days when you're just banging on all cylinders and you're killing it. Very few and far between, but when we get them, right, Joseph? And I had one of those days. And when we went to the restaurant that night, we do this thing where we try to look at someone and try to see who it reminds us of. And I came up with a hybrid of two people, one living in Europe, one living here. I was like, this person reminds me of that and that. And I was just killing it. She's like, oh, that's perfect. That's so good. And we're laughing, having a good time. So when we left the restaurant, I said, babe, can I ask you something? She goes, yeah. I said, do you think I have a genius IQ? And Danielle started laughing like you're laughing. And she laughed for 15 minutes straight, uncontrollably, till we got home. Literally, Joseph, she laughed the whole way home. She couldn't stop laughing. Like, I've never seen her laugh so much. And when we got home, she said, you're just under, babe. You're just under genius. When they sent you out, they said, nah, he's not there. Just under. So it's kind of stayed in as a joke. So people ask me a lot of times, what do you do 29 years? How do you overcome? Obviously, there's serious moments. There's tense moments. We argue. We fight just like anybody else does. But having the Lord in the center is paramount. But then humor. We found laughing together something that has been a remedy.
Wow.
And we are best friends. Yeah.
That is so good. And I do agree with you on laughter and joking and stand-up. Kirsten and I go through all of that, and it has been massive for me, our 14 years, so that's amazing.
Awesome, man. Thanks for giving me a chance to share that.
No, it'd be great one day to have a conversation on marriage and have Danielle talk about it too. I'm sure there'll be some jokes.
Oh, yeah.
So we were going to go into Solomon, and I know Solomon has impacted you big time. And most people, when they think of Solomon, only think of the dream and the encounter where he asked for wisdom. But I know in some of your content, you go into 2 or 3 other things, and one especially the largeness of heart that most people ignore. I'd love to begin this conversation there on firstly with wisdom. Your thoughts on wisdom, how someone can engage wisdom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when it says in James 1, if anyone lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives liberally and does not condemn. That's what James 1:5 says. I had always thought it was asking for the noun wisdom. But what Solomon encountered by applying the noun of wisdom, right? The ability to have a lot of understanding and to be able to properly deal with knowledge, which is what he was trained in by his father, according to Proverbs 4. When I was young, and when I was my father's son, tender in the arms of my mother, my father taught me, right? And he said, get wisdom. The wisdom he brought to the table when he had the dream was different than the wisdom he was given when he answered the question well. That's really important for us to understand. Anyone who thinks it's the same wisdom is going to miss the opportunity to engage with the person of wisdom, which is the spirit of wisdom, which is one of the 7 spirits of Yahweh.
So good.
So Solomon, having the wisdom that came from his father, not having yet, in my opinion, encountered the spirit of wisdom, asks for wisdom because that's what he was trained to ask for. And because he didn't ask for wealth, the life of his enemies, he didn't ask for honor. It's really important. Honor is we're going to talk about honor, I'm sure, later, but I want to emphasize this. Honor is a one-way street. We never seek honor for ourselves, ever. The honor comes by us doing the best we can with everything that we are assigned to and walking in the most honorable way possible. And if any honor is to be had, it will come from those who recognize that we're walking honorably. So Solomon didn't ask for wisdom. And Yahweh says, because you didn't ask for the life of your enemies, for riches, and for honor, I will give you. Right? And what he gives him is an encounters, or that he introduces him to the spirit of wisdom, which is what he writes about in Proverbs 8. It's a feminine pronoun throughout Proverbs 1, Proverbs 4, Proverbs 8, Proverbs 7. It's always a feminine pronoun because it's a she. It's a feminine looking being. I've encountered her many times, and I did so, Joseph. You asked me by asking God to make the introduction. If any lack wisdom, let him ask of God. We come through the door, who is Christ. And if we have a chance to talk about that door later, as it comes to Abraham and Melchizedek and why Abraham gave tithes to Melchizedek, that door is very important because it was in operation from the foundations of the world, not just when Jesus turned 30 and shows up at the Jordan. So we go through the door that is Christ to our Father's world to seek and to petition for the introductions. Just like if you were to introduce me to a mutual friend or someone you want to become a mutual friend, you say, hey, this is Joseph. I want to introduce Marios to you, right? I would have a very hard time connecting with someone, especially of influence and wealth and prominence, if I cold connected to them or cold called them. But if you make the introduction as a personal friend of that person, it changes things. And that's what happens. God introduced him to the spirit of wisdom, who then took over. And through that encounter and that relationship, which we learn a lot about, not only in Proverbs, but especially in Ecclesiastes. Read Ecclesiastes, I would say to anyone, with the lens of what wisdom did for Solomon, and you'll find her in all of it, including why he says it's all vanity, which it's not.
Amazing. That's so deep. We could go so deep here. This is so good.
Got time. Much of it is we want to get into, man.
Yeah. Well, we will revisit the door. I'm going to write that down here because that would be really cool. But just coming back to this Solomon's journey and his prayer, and then now he's engaging wisdom, and we see that the way Solomon ruled, there were no enemies, everyone was blessed. Can you touch on what you see happening over there and how that can relate to us today?
Yeah, so this is going to sound like a cliche, but the if you can't beat them, join them does not happen more emphatically as it does in Israel's history when Solomon was king. Because before that time and since, that entire region wanted Israel off the map. During Solomon's reign, they can't beat them. There is more than an iron dome over Israel, and it's the hand of Yahweh not only protecting but blessing in a way whereby anyone who would have before this time positioned themselves as an enemy of Israel realizes, I'm better off becoming an ally. I'm better off actually bringing tribute to the king and honoring him. So think about this. All the kings of the earth, including former enemies that David had to shed their blood to get to this moment, they all came to hear the wisdom of Solomon, each of them bringing his gift, it says in the word, in both Kings and Chronicles. And the first gift, of course, was gold. And I do hope we go there and talk a little bit about why he put gold. What was the significance of gold in this whole equation? And what's the significance for us? But going back to the original question, all the world comes, there's peace because nobody wants to fight Israel because everybody's benefiting from Israel. And they're benefiting financially. They're benefiting in commerce. And I believe there's peace in their nations like there's peace in Israel, every man having peace under their vine and fig tree, it says. And of course, if there's as much gold and silver in Israel as there are stones, and there are blueprints that Solomon's engaging with through which he can then distribute understanding, knowledge, strategies, answer questions, deal with conflicts that are coming to him, like the queens of Sheba, if you would, coming and saying, I'm dealing with this issue, I'm dealing with this person, I want to expand in these areas, what would you say? Then nobody wants to pit themselves against Israel. Everybody wants to partner with Israel. That's why the gold of Ophir was coming to him, which I personally don't believe the gold of Ophir was of this world. I believe that was supernatural gold, like the gold that is in heaven that we read about in Revelation. And that's a whole other thing. It doesn't say streets of gold anywhere in the Bible. That's a religious doctrine. It says the street, which translates to platia in Greek, which is the square. So there's an actual square in heaven that is a cube, because heaven is a cube, the New Jerusalem, if you would. And in the New Jerusalem, there is a street, which is a square, which is a cube of gold. And I believe a lot of that gold was like the gold of Ophir, so much so that Solomon would trade the gold from Ophir when he ascended to honor what he received from heaven. But that's my own opinion. Nobody has to receive that or run with it, but I do. And it's changed my life.
That is fascinating. And yeah, there's so many places we can go here. But so there's so much silver that they're putting on the side of the street, right? They're overflowing. Queen of Sheba comes and she sees something that makes her, like, deeply impacts her and makes her consider that Solomon's God is God. Can you touch on that a little bit? Like, what was she seeing? What was she noticing?
So let's go with what the word says she saw, and then let's break it down, because what it says is not what it says. And I say this respectfully. I'm not questioning scripture. I'm questioning the interpretation of scripture.
Yes.
So what she saw first of all, we need to understand that the Queen of Sheba was extremely wealthy herself. She lived in opulent places herself. She has seen wealth. She's not impressed with stuff. One thing I've learned by being around the rich and being in rich circles most of my life is that when you have a lot of wealth, you're not impressed with other people's stuff. You respect it. You may appreciate it. You may say, oh, that's so nice. But you're not impressed with it the way she was undone. What made her come undone was the way that she recognized wisdom's input in his life, and through him, the woven fabric of wisdom in the whole nation that was bringing prosperity to the whole world. So it says that when she saw the apparel of his servants and their seating, so what she beheld was all the servants seated, which is not what servants do. They're always standing and they're walking about doing things, but the servants were seated, and they were seated with Solomon, who also looked like them. That was one of the things that blew her mind, is that he was, and some of these things have come through encounter. Some of them are clearly written in the word. You just have to piece it together. But Solomon dressed like them at times because he wanted to receive from them, because he was the kind of leader that was teachable even by those he was leading. I just said something. Leaders who are only teaching others and are not willing to be teachable and learn from others are going to be limited. So he's the kind of leader who's learning from any place he can learn, because wisdom is operating through all of it. If he dresses with royal regalia, there will be a wall of separation between him and those he wishes to learn from. So he dresses like them, sits with them, and then there's a give and take. That's good leadership. She sees that. But then she sees the way by which he goes up to the house of his God, which is where wrong interpretation is at its apex, right? The interpretation that's been given throughout various scripture interpretations is that it's an entryway, like almost like you think it's woodwork or marble or stone or something like this. It had nothing to do with carpentry or masonry or any way by which we build things on earth. The original Hebrew, it took me 6 months to go back to every word, to every letter, and to research this. So now I'm giving you 6 months to everybody watching this of research. What it really means is when she saw the way by which he dimensionally ascended.
Wow.
Which means when she understood that he lived out of both worlds, ascending to that one, receiving a blueprint, breathing on this earth what he got there, inhaling in heaven, exhaling on earth. to make earth look like heaven, so heaven has something to land on. When she saw that process, she was undone, because then it made sense why they couldn't go into the temple on the day they dedicated it. Then it made sense like why everybody's coming and everyone's bringing so much wealth. It made sense why she felt prompted to bring the most spices anybody had ever brought, and gold in abundance, and all these other things through rough terrain to get there.
Amazing.
So she sees all these things. She listens to his wisdom. But the one thing I want to highlight, and this is something I'm bringing this year that I haven't taught on yet. So I want to honor you, Joseph, and your platform and all the people who follow you by releasing this here first.
Wow.
The wisdom that Joseph manifested was spoken. There was nothing in Joseph's life that he could show to demonstrate to Pharaoh that he was wise. When he finished interpreting the dream about the 7 lean cows and the 7 fat cows and so on, and he tells the king there's 7 years of famine following 7 years of abundance, the next words out of his mouth were, now, therefore, you need to find a man. It's always a man. And I'm working on something that I'm not going to release here, which has to do with why Solomon asked for Hiram to give him a man, one man, who could do everything. There's a reason why there's a man. It doesn't have to be a man. It could be a woman, sexy laundry, Proverbs 31 woman. But in Joseph's day, he says, now, therefore, you need someone who's going to do these things. And what he says in the next 6 or 7 verses qualifies him as the man to be the man. Why? Because wisdom was heard. He spoke it, and the Pharaoh listened to it. Here's what's original for me this year. In Solomon's day, the wisdom is seen, because it says when the queen of Sheba saw the wisdom of Solomon. It doesn't say she heard it anywhere. It says when she saw the wisdom of Solomon. In other words, it was tangible. The operation of the spirit of wisdom through Solomon and with Solomon to establish the Israel under Solomon's reign had a tangible manifestation of the goodness of God in the land of the living in such a way where life came to death, where hope came to despair, where transformation came when it was needed. She got a hold of that. She was undone.
Wow. That is so good. This is so deep. I mean,
there's one more phase to the wisdom, which I'm not going to release here, but I'll just give you a sneak preview. There's another dimension of wisdom, which is we wear it to where you don't even have to show anything. You walk in a room and it's very clear. You walk in wisdom because wisdom makes an introduction for you.
Wow.
And I believe that's what we're supposed to walk in, but I'm still working on that part.
That's amazing. I can't wait till that comes out. This was so good. We have to do, I mean, if you're available, a bunch of these to go into these subjects, because this is so good. So just carrying on here, she comes, she sees all this, has this impact. Can you touch a little bit on why royalty always brings gifts to royalty and what the thought process is? And why is she bringing something that already exists in this man's kingdom, right?
Right. So good. That's one of my most favorite questions you've asked, because that's how kings live. There's a priestly component to our life on the earth as kings and priests that requires of us to operate the way kings do. Kings don't bargain for the cheapest possible price all the time. Kings don't skimp when it comes to showing honor to those they want to honor. And kings move. And when they move, resources move with them. And if those resources are exchanged through honor, there's another component of God's love and the manifestation of God's love by way of honor that becomes tangible. And now someone has something in front of them that communicates where the person who gave it to them comes from and what realm they're operating out of. And so this moving of kings or rulers or people of significant impact on the earth with gifts is so profound to us. I will say this, Joseph, I've done many events where there is just no way that anything could be traded, given to me by way of honorariums. You know, people sometimes will trade on PayPal, these kinds of things that will match what I've spent to go there. Because what I will give my host like if I can just say this, recently I got into diamonds these last couple of years, and I just decided, I've given enough gold and silver. I just want to bring people diamonds, and so it's kind of leveled me up. I did a whole teaching called Leveling Up recently. It's on my site. It's very cheap. I highly recommend it, where I talk about what happened to me in upgrading to diamonds in terms of what I'm getting into and what I'm investing in. And so why not bring the very thing I'm eating out of to the place I'm going? Well, diamonds are a lot more expensive than gold and silver, especially good ones. And so it's up the ante to where it's very hard for me to be profitable in any speaking engagement. It's okay. It will come from somewhere else because I'm in this flow of kingdom resource where there's never lack and there's never shortage, and it will come from other directions, even if you can't see it. And so the Queen of Sheba very strategically trades to Solomon. She brings gold because everybody was bringing gold, but she also brings more spices than anybody. She outdoes everyone else in the whole earth in one area, which was one she was very strong in, which was spices. The reason why they brought gold to Solomon, I believe, has a lot to do with his understanding of gold's wealth building brokerage capacity. Gold and silver are brokers of wealth building for the sons. They facilitate for us from heaven to earth, as they are the only money we have that God made on the earth ever. They facilitate for us the vehicles and the avenues and the blueprints through which we can build wealth if we understand them and use them properly. Not prostitute them for gain, but properly honor them as wealth building agents and transformation agents. And Solomon gets this because he's been taught this by David. Most of what was in David's treasury by way of wealth was in the form of gold. He passes it on to Solomon. What does Solomon do with it? He displays it by overlaying the entire temple with gold. It says that in one of the verses of Chronicles, the entire interior of the temple was made of gold. And it was overlaid with gold, except there was one item which was not overlay, and it was the nails, the golden nails. Somebody, a friend from South Africa, had golden nails made for me out of pure gold.
Wow.
To signify the importance of that message, which I released a few years ago, and it is on my site, and it has to do with the hiddenness. The golden nails, the nails were solid gold, 1/2 ounce each in weight of gold, because they would be hidden in the wood or in the metal or wherever they were fastening with nails, and you wouldn't be able to see them. And that signified the hiddenness process that brought David to the throne from the sheepfolds of his father Jesse in Bethlehem, and brought Solomon to a place of prominence to bring Israel to prominence in the whole earth. And he honors the hiddenness. That's the revelation I received. And anyway, there was gold everywhere, and that gold attracted gold from all over the world, because gold has a capacity, or a property, if you would, to attract wealth. It's like birds of a feather flock together. Wherever there's gold comes. So the wealth of the nations came to Solomon primarily in the form of gold, 666 talents a year, which is 666 is not the devil and all this stuff. It's 3 vavs, 666. And when you do the numerics and you understand what vav means, and you do the numerics and the 666, you add it together, 18, a 10 and an 8, or a 1 and an 8, or a 9. You do all the meanings in the Hebrew, and you will find some really interesting reasons why that number ended up being the same amount every year for 40 years by the whole earth, not communicating before they come.
Wow.
I called you, Joseph, and said, hey, what are you bringing, to make sure I bring enough so we can add up to 666. The leaders didn't have some kind of hotline where they communicated. They all came at their own time, in their own way, from their own paths. And somehow every year, 666 talents added up before Solomon. Never turned any of it back that we know of. And this is why. Because he understood that if he receives honor in the way honor was brought to him, it will establish something in the land and through his land and through God, most of all, into their nations that will prosper everyone. The tide that would raise all the ships would come in. And it could only happen if he received that honor. If false humility came in and he said, listen, I have enough gold. Can't you see? I'm surrounded by gold. Why did you bring me gold? If he does any of that and pride has anything to do with it, or false humility, which is basically pride looking like humility, if he does any of that, then there will be something that the nations will miss by way of what honor can procure for them. So why does she bring expensive gifts? Because that's how honor operates. The extent to which we receive hinges on the extent to which we honor.
Wow. That is so good. So everyone listening, now you understand you need to go and get this stuff from Ariel's shop, because there are teachings on precious metals that heavily impacted me. There's teaching just on gold that heavily impacted me. And I know it's going to transform your life and your thinking also. Man, there's so many places we can go here.
Go wherever you want. Yeah.
Where do we go? There's so many opened up right there.
One thing about Solomon is, this is obviously a very mystical part of the journey with Solomon. My understanding is that there was a creative capacity in him as king by way things were created, not just processes that he inherited from his father or building on what his father had built. Some of that, yes. For example, David's 24/7 worship continued in the day of Solomon. He inherited that from David. The wealth that David laid up to build the temple, Solomon used that. But the gold and silver being as abundant, it says he made gold and silver as abundant as stones. Or it actually says in one, I believe in Chronicles, silver was worthless in the day of Solomon, like stones are, because there was so much of it about silver. All of that had to do with the fact that I believe he engaged with technologies through which creation took place. And a good friend of mine once said that when Solomon fell and sinned, a lot of the gold that had been created disappeared, because we don't know where all that gold is. If they had as much gold as stones, that gold should be somewhere. We don't have that gold. We don't know where it is. So we believe maybe it did disappear when he fell. But regardless, the cedars of Lebanon is the part that convinces me there was a creative capacity in him. You cannot have a cedar of Lebanon in 40 years. But he said there was, in the day of Solomon, they were as abundant as the sycamores in the lowland. So the sycamore in Israel is like a weed. It's not even a substantial tree or a hardwood like a cedar. The cedars of Lebanon are what they didn't have and had to contract with Hiram to bring to them in order to build the temple. But during Solomon's reign, once the temple is built and everything gets rolling, then cedars start popping up everywhere. And I believe that's the creative, if not the creative capacity in Solomon, definitely an acceleration of natural processes that will make that possible.
Wow. Do you believe we are all called to steward like that and to walk into that? Maybe not necessarily wealth in that capacity, but like you touched on at the beginning with the stick, that we're called to multiply whatever's in front of us, whatever's with us, to steward that.
Yeah.
And do you think we have that ability? Like this is a total supernatural thing on a very high scale.
I believe that the natural leads to the supernatural when we've done our best to maximize the potential of the natural. Then I believe we qualify to seek for supernatural unction or supernatural revelation or supernatural addition or multiplication of resources. My grandmother was not educated, did not learn mighty things and great concepts, but she ran her household and her kitchen in particular like no one I've ever known. She was the queen of that kitchen. Anything that came out of it tasted delicious, was nutritious, and had love woven into every atom of it. That's all she did. She raised her kids, took care of her grandkids when they came along. She cooked for everyone. She kept the house clean, and she never spoke in front of anyone publicly. She never had any notoriety except within maybe half the neighborhood she was in, maybe, right? So there's someone who made the most out of what they were given under the circumstances she had to live in. And I think about her and others who are doing the best they can with what they have. I believe that is what qualifies us for responsibility and assignments out beyond this world and forever. It's the stewardship. It's not amounts or quantities.
Amazing. Any thoughts on diligence, excellence? I know that they're a big part of how you walk and how you live. Any thoughts on that? Any advice on that?
There has to be intentionality with both. Diligence and excellence require intentionality. You have to overcome something all the time to be excellent or to show yourself diligent. And mostly the desire to be half-baked, to be flippant, to be frivolous, to be lazy, to not go as hard. One of the things that we talked about at the very beginning, before we even started this, while people were coming into the room, was our love for CrossFit, yours and mine, and how we respect that world. And obviously, I train there all the time. And Danielle and I found CrossFit 2 years ago. Danielle started 2.5 years ago, and then she, I want to say, dragged me along, but I'm so grateful she did. And one thing we love about CrossFit is there is no room for pride. Anybody who's done it, as you have, Joseph, you know that you will always see your weaknesses. You will always know what you need to be working on. And even something you're good at today, you could get injured in tomorrow. You can do something stupid. You have to walk. You have to overcome continually, and you have to stay clothed in humility. And I love anything that's going to push me to that place where I have to remain humble, seek the Lord. I pray in tongues before every workout, bro. Every day that I go, I pray in the Spirit before I go. And I ask to be clothed with humility, not to try to prove anything, not to have an attitude, and to have strength where I'm weak. Those kind of environments, whether it's fitness cycle or a fitness program or an occupational thing or something going on, conflict, anything that can bring us to that place of humility, of brokenness, of recognition of our limitation, and yet the unlimited of power of Christ in us. Those things are very valuable.
Amazing. I love that you mentioned tongues. You know, I have heard people say that tongues is like outdated technology. I don't know if you've ever heard anyone say that.
Oh, wow.
But I have seen so much power with tongues just in my life. And so it's great to hear you mention that too.
Yeah, I don't pray in English very much. So if it's outdated technology, I'm an old timer. I'm old school.
Man, you know, we talk about the hidden nails, so the golden nails, and being hidden and concealed and then being revealed. You talk about that so well.
Yeah.
And made so much sense to me on that. But also, I just want to ask this. So in all those times, it feels like you have so much depth to bring, right? Like even in this podcast, we're touching on things, but we can't really feed someone a meal, because you would do a 2-hour meal on one of these subjects that we talked about. How did you build that? How did you become that? And any advice for people that want to go deeper?
So I valued hiddenness from a young age. Most of what I grew up in was in hiddenness, because when you read books, you're not doing it publicly. I had a deformity in my face that made me unappealing, and I was reclusive, and I read books, and I was able to hide and be, being fully revealed and fully concealed are the way I understand them, stages of hiddenness. Hiddenness is a state of being that emanates from a choice. It's not about people not seeing you. It's about choosing to be hidden, to be finding affirmation, motivation, inspiration, and encouragement from the Lord only. And so I was concealed, hidden. So there's fully revealed when everybody sees you, fully concealed where nobody does. but then it's all within hiddenness. And then there's process in between the two stages. So growing up, I was forced into concealment in many, many areas of life because of the way I was raised and because of the things that happened to me. And that cultivated in me a desire to do great things that nobody would know about, because it wasn't important that they know about them. It was important that I did them. And that's why I joined the Green Berets, is because I had learned, especially in the Cypriot culture, where the Green Berets have a legendary status. I can never drive that across, because somebody growing up in that culture would understand what I just said. But it's legendary there. Like Navy SEALs are here because of the way movies have portrayed them in books and so on. Well, that's in the very fabric of Cypriot society for the Green Berets and the Navy SEALs of Cyprus. So I decided to do the unthinkable. Like, to even try to get in was unthinkable for me, because I didn't have the physical qualifications. I was never very strong. I was never the best athlete, none of that. But I decided to go there because I had learned that they operate under the cover of darkness in adverse weather conditions, and they operate in hiddenness. And because I was growing up in hiddenness, many times because of things that were beyond my control, for example, the deformity in my face and so on, I found that to be the place for me. And once you get there, they drill it in you that if you're here for applause, you will be disappointed. You shouldn't have come here. But for me, it was life, because that's the realm I had learned to operate in from a young boy. And so us going out when it was raining and nobody's seeing us and nobody's ever going to know about it, and we're going to operate under the cover of darkness in enemy territory and all that stuff, that was life to me. So I think that all these things developed inside of me this fascination with and passion for hiddenness that built up an authority in me, not just to talk about it, but to live it in a way whereby I don't need to say anything if I have nothing to say, and I don't need a platform to stand on if there isn't one inviting me to it. But when I do speak, the essence and the substance of everything that's been building in me in the quiet time and in the times between assignments somehow comes out. Like I was talking to someone just last night and saying, I have a lot of authority when it comes to raising money. Like if I say, let's do this, it will happen. And it's because of the way I live in the hidden place that no one knows what I'm doing. Only God knows financially in terms of giving. So if I call for somebody to give, there's going to be authority on it. People can choose whether to do it or not, but the authority will be there. It's the same thing when we come out of hiddenness. We have a voice that I believe is louder than any voice we could have, because it got cultivated in the quiet place, in the secret place, in the secret place of the Most High, abiding under the shadow of the Almighty. And I can honestly say this, Joseph, I say this over and over again. If I never, ever stand in front of an audience again, I'm at peace, if that's what's supposed to be. This is a sacrifice for me, not because I'm shy and not because I don't want to do it. I love it when I'm doing it, but I prefer to be hidden, concealed. And so what's happened in our society, we are inundated with opportunities to not only use our voice and be heard, but to become a voice, and sometimes in unfounded ways or premature ways. But one of the saddest things is someone with talent having opportunity to become a voice prematurely. Because if the process that gets you to the spotlight on the front of stage does not happen, there will be a limitation to how far you can go from that spot of authority and recognition. And that's something I couldn't emphasize enough. Go through the process. Let diligence be built into the fabric of who we are. Excellence become an overflow of the way we live, rather than just catchphrases that we use to write books, to preach sermons, to coach people. I know you live this way, and I know you value the very substance of what excellence and diligence are, and not the noun, so to speak, or the theory of it.
Man, this is so good. And so when we talk about something like fame, like God revealing to you, people knowing you, and I love how you talk about you can still be hidden in Him,
Yeah.
even though you are known by people. Can you just touch on fame a little bit? If there's someone listening and they know God's called them to a wider, bigger platform, and maybe like something like happened to me where it was looked down upon or shunned of like even putting like having a social media platform, for example.
Yeah.
Can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, I don't believe fame from God's perspective is something wrong or something we shouldn't pursue, but we shouldn't pursue it for the sake of what fame is, the way fame has been portrayed in the world as the catalyst for great notoriety or wealth or position. Fame is a tool through which we magnify him in the eyes of everyone that we are famous in front of. Fame is actually a weapon in God's arsenal, if you would, or a tool in his tool belt that he makes available to us, just like he does resources. And so if I have any degree of notoriety on any particular platform or any realm of influence in life, if I'm anchored in Christ and I'm rightly aligned with him, that fame facilitates something for God and for the kingdom that I probably couldn't have if it was just me doing my thing. So I believe that favor has a huge part in establishing fame for us, and honor and favor form an arc and become the gateway through which we enter. And I also believe then wisdom is available to clothe us in humility. Being clothed in humility is multifaceted. There isn't just one garment. There are many different garments for many different instances where we have to be clothed in humility. For example, when our enemy falls, we're not supposed to rejoice. We have to put on a garment of humility for that. When we have a major achievement or a major victory, different garment of humility than the one I mentioned before, and so on. So these are things I've learned to navigate in layers. I've learned to not so much ascend to, but access. And as we come into these, in our walk with the Lord, we come into this understanding that the bar is raised now. To whom much is given, much will be required. If I'm in front of a lot more people, I'm accountable to those people. And one of the biggest mistakes leaders have made, which has led to downfalls of leaders, is that they felt they were invincible. They felt they were above the law. They felt like they were better than, or at a different plane than the people they were leading. Thus, they became prideful and careless and eventually foolish. Even Solomon did that. He talks about this in Ecclesiastes as the preacher. He talks about vanity 36 times, uses the word vanity. Why? Is it because it's all vanity? No, it's all vanity if it isn't for the right reasons, in the right settings, with the right heart. That's what he's basically getting at in Ecclesiastes. And he's made the mistake. And he knows that if you're doing it for all the wrong reasons with the wrong heart, it will bite you. But if you're doing it, if you're anchored in the Lord and you're doing everything for his glory, you can enjoy all things. You can do all things. Even Paul said, I can eat a piece of meat offered unto idols by just giving thanks over it. The demons can't touch me. It's not the issue. The issue is, what is the motivation? What is the heart setting that we enter into these things with?
This is so good. And so if we come back to that 1 Kings 4:29, and it's talking about wisdom, and then it talks about largeness of heart. I loved your message on that. Can we touch on that, the importance of largeness of heart? What is that?
Yeah, the first thing that rocked me about largeness of heart is that I realized a few years ago that God gave that to Solomon, along with wisdom and wealth and all the other things he gave him. And then I realized, if it's something God gives, what qualifies me for it? So what I believe qualifies us for largeness of heart is generosity. So generosity and liberality, becoming a river of blessing for the lives of everybody that is connected to us and the things that we are passionate about, establishes us before the Lord as good stewards who could be given more, like the talents, the minas. We go to those examples. Someone did well with one. They were given rulership over cities, right? That was quite a promotion for just dealing with some money. Yeah. Why? Because there's an exponential reward for exceptional stewardship. And that exponential reward in our case would be the Lord entrusting us with more responsibility and giving more resources to us to steward. But I believe largeness of heart is what he's aiming for us to demonstrate, and that's one thing he gives to us. I cannot have largeness of heart. I have to qualify for it and then grow in it as I'm given measures of it. I don't have any evidence anywhere that we are born with largeness of heart. We see it modeled and we could be inspired by it, like I did in my own family. Like I had members of my family that were very generous, and that generosity and their liberality, where they would say, listen, I know there's only 6 of us, but I want to have enough food for 10 just to make sure there's enough. That was largeness of heart, going beyond what was required, right? Or giving gifts on their birthdays. That's one thing my family always did. Is I hope my kids aren't listening, but they would my dad, my aunts, my mom, my uncles, they would give us gifts when it was their birthday to say, I want to celebrate you in my life, instead of taking the spotlight off of them and then putting it on everyone else. So that's largeness of heart. And in largeness of heart, what it does, Joseph, is it overshadows anything that's important to us. So if largeness of heart would be the engine of a vehicle, a piston would be generosity. Generosity is one facet of largeness of heart, but largeness of heart is what encompasses not just generosity, but also protection and care, and carrying in our hearts other people, praying for them, as the Apostle Paul would say, without ceasing. You can't just pray for someone without ceasing, but if you carry them in your heart, you're always praying for them. Largeness of heart enables us to do that. And it also enables us to not get petty and to rise above the things that wrap people around axles or limit people in their capacity to bring change, because they get so caught in the minutia. Largeness of heart enables us to supersede and to transcend situations like that.
So good. And that was something I think a lot of people have missed, right? That largeness of heart bit, which makes it so powerful. I'm going to plug in again. Go get that teaching.
One example of it is when we would host people that would speak at our church when we led a church years ago. We would want to demonstrate to that individual that they were coming into a generous house to be blessed. And one thing, Joseph, that I always loved, and I have authority to speak on these things because of the way we've lived, and I will go there. Okay, I'm going to go into some stuff. I always wanted people to, if they came from another country, they would have one of each of the US dollars bills. They would have 10 ones, $2 bills, which are harder to find, $5 bills, $10 bills, 20s, 50, and 100 in an envelope. So they would have US cash to operate. So before anything is done, and that would not be part of their honorarium, that was just us blessing them to have some cash in case they wanted to go across the street from the hotel and buy Coke. And also showing them, you've come into a place where we got you now. Most people that are in ministry know what it's like to go without or to leave your family hoping you come back with something. We wanted them to know, we're going to bless your socks off. And this is how you're going to know it. They would come into a basket with all kinds of wonderful things. Sometimes we would spy on them to find what they liked. And we would put all the things they love and all the things they enjoy to eat and all the snacks and, vegan this and sushi that and all the stuff, whatever we could get to show them we value you and we care about you and we're going to take care of you while you're here. And then we would give them generous honorariums and we would communicate ahead of time. We are guaranteeing you this amount. And if more comes, we'll give you more. But you will not leave with less than this. Are you okay with that? And then we would bless them. I don't know anyone who came and would say, I wasn't richly blessed. We would take them to the best restaurants. And I had board members. I had one member who literally resigned over the level of honor we wanted to show our guests. He literally did, because he wanted to have potatoes and carrots in a broth and chickens that were boiled in a huge vat and to do it as cheaply as possible, because that's the way he lived. And I respect that. I respect frugality. I will never knock the frugal, but I believe there was a standard that I had to operate in because of the way God was orchestrating things and also the way he raised me, that required of me to go beyond boiled potatoes and carrots and a boiled chicken. So I wanted them to have the best. I wanted them to experience, because that's what Solomon did. There was a city that was actually responsible to provide for the king's table, and there were regents, one for each month, responsible for raising whatever it would take to put food on Solomon's table. And at some point, anyone who's interested, you should go and read what they ate every day at Solomon's table. It wasn't boiled potatoes and carrots and chickens.
Man.
So these things framed for us something, and I would always pay people before they left. There would never be a situation where the check will be in the mail. I can't tell you how many times, Joseph, people in the early days when I was going through every door, not when I started to walk with people who carried honor, they would say, the check will be in the mail, brother. But after the momentum of the meetings was over, hearts would change and things would come in, and sometimes they would keep some for themselves or do this or that, and it would never be what it would have been if they had just. So there's a verse of scripture that Dr. O actually was the one who said this one time, and I realized that's the verse for what we've been doing. And it says, "You shall not withhold pay from your servants, lest they despise you. You shall pay them at the end. You shall pay them their wages at the end of their day."
Wow.
And Dr. O had mentioned that from the Old Testament. And I realized, man, that's what we've been doing. Now that makes sense. It was actually a commandment at one point. And we're not bound by that law in the capacity that the law was given. However, there are some things we can extract from it to make our lives better. I can tell you that. And so, like, for example, not killing people and so on. So that's another one. I never wanted someone to leave and wonder, I wonder if they're going to send me something. I wonder what. I didn't want anybody to go back to their wife, to their children, or their husband and not have something to show for what they left the house for. Why? Because I was also traveling and doing this. And there were many times I came home not knowing what would happen, having to go to a bank and get a whole bunch of ones and bring them back and give the kids so that they would see that I came back with something for them. These things are important. And so honor is an action verb to me, Joseph. It's living. It moves us to do things that may not even make sense, but it has to count for something. It can't just be a feeling. Honor can't just be how I think of you, how I feel about you. Honor moves me from how I feel about you to do something. And if you're coming into my house, I'm going to honor you, or I wouldn't have you. If you're coming, we're going to honor you. And so we have different rules like that. Like, one of the things is, if I open any of my safes to show somebody something that's in it, I have to give them something. That's my rule.
Wow.
Because I don't want somebody to ever be tempted to covet what I have. I want them to know, if I'm opening this safe, I'm going to bless you, so that everything could be safe and they could feel valued and they don't feel like I'm showing off. And I also keep my heart in check because we're blessed. And I want everybody connected to me to be blessed. These are all things that largeness of heart will establish. But it starts with generosity, and then the Lord gives a largeness of heart that then brings the blessing to a wider spectrum than generosity ever could take it.
This is next level. This is amazing. I know that those of you listening and those of you that are going to watch the recording, man, we learned something so powerful right here. Man, that's amazing, Marius.
Thanks.
I want to ask you your thoughts on overcoming. We talk a lot about overcoming. There's always a reward. Can you touch on that a little bit? The need to overcome, and also the need for resistance, a challenge, because everything has a purpose. Can you touch on that?
Yeah, the tension is necessary in our lives. In the world, you will have tribulations, but be of good cheer. Yeshua said, I have overcome the world. So he is the ultimate overcomer who overcame for our sakes. He overcame so that we can. And being an overcomer is woven into our DNA from God in such a way where I believe the best of us manifests when we have to overcome, more so than when we are at ease. So if you brought me to a 5-star hotel and we went to a 3 Michelin star restaurant, which I would love that, by the way, and we just had the most wonderful experience, and we went to the pool and to the jacuzzi and slept in opulent rooms and all these things, I promise you I'm not at my best. in terms of what capacity God put in me to be at my best. I'm not saying we shouldn't do those things, and there aren't times for relaxation and enjoyment and the best of the best. I'm not saying that at all, because I will not camp ever again after the Green Berets. I always want what I just described. But when I'm at my best is when there is conflict or when there's challenge. It awakens in us that primal God-given capacity to be at our best as an overcomer.
Wow.
But it says in the scripture, blessed be God who gives us the victory through Christ, and through us diffuses the fragrance of his knowledge in every place. So what happens is we get pressed, and in the press, there's the release of the fragrance of God in every place through us.
Wow.
It never says that anywhere about when you're having good times. That's what happens. Even Paul says, these light afflictions, which is but for a moment, work in us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. It's over and over and over again in Paul's writings in the New Testament. We see it in the way, not specifically said that way, except in the Psalms, but throughout the Old Testament, there are examples of this where you see the overcomers rise to levels and attain knowledge of God in a way that ease and comfort would never accomplish. So it's imperative. And overcoming is both a science, an art, and a passion. And we will be tested in it. And I am tested in it. I did a teaching. I don't know if you ever have a chance to listen to Wisdom's Echo, but I did one in December. It's a daily podcast that comes out, or I think we do one every few days now. And I did one called The Frog in the Bird's Mouth, which I considered personally, I felt the worst about all the ones I'd ever done. I always tell a story. We call it story time with Marius. And I didn't feel great about it. It was about how I learned to overcome when I was in the Green Berets. There's a phrase that got built into my psyche while my head was in the mud and somebody was just putting me in and out of the mud and telling me I need to quit and I don't belong there and I'm too weak and I'm going to put everybody in jeopardy and I should quit and I should quit and I should quit. And that happened every day over and over and over again, because it's designed to get rid of you and not to keep you. And when I was in that program and going through that selection, there was a moment when my head was in the mud and this phrase framed in my mind that has never left me: no one can quit for me. I'm the only one who can quit for myself, and I'm not quitting.
Wow.
So no matter how much they taunted me and told me I was weak, and I was weak, and all this other stuff, I knew that if I didn't give up, I would win. And only I could give up. If they could have given up for me, they would have given up on day one for me. But they couldn't. That authority rested with me. When I got a hold of the authority I had to overcome, I overcame.
Wow.
So I did this teaching, and I didn't think it was that great when I did it. I didn't feel it. And sometimes we go by feeling, and we shouldn't. I have had more comments, trades, people calling me, texting me, going to conferences, people talking to me, tears in their eyes saying, I was on the verge of giving up, and I listened to that. So we have no idea what impact we can have as overcomers just by overcoming. Someone's looking at us, especially the younger ones.
That is so good.
Even to say 29 years married, it's not all easy. It's not all roses. Somebody's listening to this right now. You're struggling in your marriage. You can make it. If I got to 29 years with my wife, Danielle, and she got to 29 years with me especially, you can make it. Be encouraged. Don't give up.
Wow.
I also want to say this. People are nasty to you. People are mean to you. You have a boss who's got the disposition of a barracuda. I have authority to tell you, if you don't give up, you win. Stay your course. Hold true to that which you know to be true, and let the Lord deliver you and settle you and bring peace. You are an overcomer by the blood of the Lamb, by the word of our testimony. I bless you today as an overcomer to overcome.
So good. And we're coming into an hour 40. There is so much depth. I got to come back to this. I know many are going to come back to this. Just a couple more things we could touch on just as we maybe land in a bit. Is I really value how much you value relational equity. Being in some form of ministry, just in my case, like for 15 years, 16 years, seeing leadership, seeing the transactional and doctrinal equity being the focus, but it's so different for you. Can you touch on that? Because you've been in ministry for over two decades, 3 decades maybe, and you've seen so much. How did you land where you're like, hey, relationships matter more than anything else, even though it wasn't modeled to you maybe?
Yeah, I grew up in a spiritual environment or a culture where function was the predominant motivator for people to come together. So you find two gifted communicators or leaders, and they form some kind of an agreement or relationship, and it's so that they can do something together. And it wouldn't take long if you went to some kind of ministry retreat within a denominational movement like the one we were in. It wouldn't take long where you find the birds of the feather and you immediately think, how could we work together? Hey, I'd like you to come, and maybe I can come, and maybe we can go do this missions thing together. And it would happen very quickly after meeting someone, but not walking with them and journeying with them. When I remember starting the book Tables and Platforms, Joseph, which you had mentioned. In that book, somebody quoted something from it recently, and it rocked my world. And I've written it so long ago, I don't remember everything that's in it. But I read some quotes that somebody had posted, and then at the bottom I saw my name, and I was mortified. But I was so impacted by it in that moment because I needed it. And I started that book by telling the story of how I met someone it was actually in Singapore. And I don't say that in the book because I'm trying to be discreet, particularly because of who this was. But it was somebody of high notoriety and caliber. And I didn't know who this person was. I didn't know. He was introduced to me by my friend. And we hit it off, man. An hour and a half of just life-giving substance between us. It was so powerful. And when we got done, he says, listen, I'm also one of the leaders for Joseph Prince's church. It's called New Creation, maybe.
Yeah, I think it is. Yes.
Yeah. So he said, I want to talk to my pastor about you coming and speaking at our church. So see, it went from an hour and a half of life-giving exchange to what can we do together, right? And I said, no, man. He put his hand up. He says, is that okay, pastor? He said. And I just flicked his hand. I say this in the book. And I said, no, man. I want to meet your wife. I want your wife to meet my wife. I want us to journey together. Because if you introduce me to your pastor, what's going to happen is if he likes me, you're going to be taken out of the equation very quickly. And then it's going to be me being a guest of the house and coming in. They hardly know me. A lot of question marks. Who is this guy? Is he going to do what we expect him to do? Is he going to finish right on the 30 minutes that we give? Like all this stuff, I've done it. I've spoken in the mega churches. Man, I went to a place in Singapore one time where they had elevators to bring me to the 6th level because there were 5 other language services going on at the same time. Man. It was the city. I was just like, getting out of a car, going here, going there. That's the one where I was next to this lady in the elevator, and she goes, are you Antonio Banderas? No, it's back when I had hair and it was slicked back. And she's like, are you Antonio Banderas? I said, no. She goes, okay, good morning then. So it's always made me wonder, why did she say good morning then? Like, why did she, like, would she not have, whatever. I don't know what Antonio Banderas did to her, but it was a weird interaction I've had. But anyway, all this to say, Joseph, I've been in the settings where function led us to a place to do stuff together, but it was a veneer thin of substance in terms of anything beyond the platform. What I found is if I can build a mountain with you off the platform in relationship, one spark on the platform can change something. Right? So whatever we built together in 3 years of journeying together in Hiddenness gives me an opportunity now to speak to someone who's struggling in their marriage and say, you're going to be okay, don't give up, and they won't get a divorce tomorrow.
Wow.
Because there's authority that got built up, not just from what Marios has built up in his life and God put in me, but also what we've done together. And that authority is exponentially greater because 2 is better than 1.
Wow. That
So
is
what I
so
found
good.
is, in starting to walk with Ian Clayton, I realized that he wanted relationship above all things. And we did, but we didn't have the language for it or the framework that he started to present about autonomous empowerment. We empower each other to do what we're supposed to do in the fields that we're called to, and we want to walk together, journey together. I want to meet your wife. I want to sit with your kids. He would always just engage with my kids, trade into them, bless them, know their names, know what they were into, to the point where I started to develop folders with people's names and things about them, and be able to actually engage with them before I go to their nation, so that I actually have something to build on. And these are all things that we've cultivated and developed in our culture for whatever it is, to say function isn't as important to us as actually walking together and loving each other and growing together.
Wow.
And that's where the glory is. That's where the value is for me.
That is so good. Hey, so I'm sure you've had times where maybe you have been building a connection and it didn't go all the way, or maybe the other person backed out, or have you had times like that? And how did you process that disappointment or discouragement?
Yeah. So my default is to trust and to not think this person's going to burn me at some point, even though it may happen. No matter how much I get burned in relationships, or relationships fall apart, and especially the ones when we were young and we had young kids, our kids wouldn't understand why people walked out of our lives and their kids are not their friends anymore because of anything, not because of anything they did, right? They wouldn't understand that. And it's caused them a lot of pain. Even though that happened to us, I still choose my default to be trust. And I will open my life to whatever extent that relationship calls for me to open my life to it. And if I get burned and if somebody walks away, it's on them, especially if they're at fault or if they initiated the breakup. I'm not always right and I'm not always perfect, but I believe if I'm confronted with my wrong, I would do everything I can to make it right. And integrity is really important. When you have integrity, even if you're wrong, you can be right. And so when people have walked, there's of course levels of pain depending on how close they were to our family, to our home, to our lives. But somehow the overcoming kicks in and enables us to keep moving. And what I've done, what's enabled me to keep going, is to focus on who's walking with me instead of who left me. Remember one time, Joseph, we were doing a demolition of an old building to build a new building. And the demo day, we asked the whole church to come out with sledgehammers and things. We all need to do this. It's a huge project, and it was going to save us tens of thousands if we did it than if we brought a company in to do it. So we got permission to do the demo. We said, please come. And very few people came. Out of a church of 200 and something people at the time, very few people turned up, maybe 5 or 6. And the people who came kept saying, where is everybody? Pastor, where is everybody? Why aren't the people here? And I said, if I thought about where they are, I would be missing out on focusing on you who's here. I'm so glad you came. And I celebrate the fact that it's just few of us so we can connect more. So I turned it positive. So instead of looking at who's left me and who's walked out of our lives, or what relationship blew up and is not going anywhere good anymore, what do I have that is worth putting my focus and my attention and my resources into? And that's given me life.
That is so good. So good. What would be your advice to people that have a calling that is outside of typical ministry, outside of the church, maybe outside of the box, and have not been understood by those around them, especially maybe leaders or people who have prominence in the church space? Have you got any advice for people like that?
Yeah, first of all, I celebrate what you're doing and the way you follow your call, regardless of what that is. And I despise the separation that has come between secular and sacred, to say that this is secular and that is sacred. There's no such thing. Following our callings is sacred. And what you're doing is sacred because God called you to it. And if you're misunderstood there, one thing that's helped me a lot is to understand that the unconventional thinkers, and most of us in this stream are, just by virtue of connecting to this particular material, unconventional thinkers and mavericks and adventurers and those who ask a lot of questions are never going to have a surrender from those who don't think that way. Maybe a ceasefire, but you'll never get a surrender. So run with those who are running. Find sources of encouragement, inspiration, and life for yourself, and keep going for it as an assignment that you have from God to be a manifestation of his goodness and of his wisdom and of his excellence and of his power on the earth. And don't worry about it. It's impossible to be understood. We are square pegs in a round hole. It just doesn't work. It's because we have understood some things and gotten a hold of some things and have callings in some areas that are unconventional, and celebrate that. I celebrate you for that. So I would also say walk in honor. And in the book Weaponised Honor, of course, I talk about Esther and how she even approached the arch enemy of Israel at that time, who was Haman, coming out of the secret place and wanting to honor the king and Haman with a banquet. That was part of the strategy she received. But her role was to put honor on Haman, and whereby I believe she marked the target for heaven to take out with its missiles, which is something we did. We painted the target. We put an electromagnetic signal on a target, and then the Air Force would hit it with a missile. And that's kind of what she did with Haman. Honor can weaponize. You honor, God will take care of the rest. So I've faced enemies. We could have 3 sessions like this to go over that stuff, and I wouldn't want to. I never want to go back there. We faced opposition, persecution, resistance, brutal attacks over the years because of who we are and what direction we're moving in. And I never wavered from that which we are called to, which is what I believe the Lord wanted to see. And eventually he took care of the rest. And we just honored everyone along the way, valued what was of God in them, which is what honor does, by the way. Honoring you, Joseph, enables me to unlock the best of what is of God in you and pull it towards me. When I honor you, I make available to me the best of what's in you that I recognize, and I can benefit from it. So when we honor a room full of people, everything comes to the table to be made available for everyone. That's what honor does.
Amazing. That is so good. So the last thing that maybe we can land on here is the subject you brought up, where you were talking about the door that is Christ, and we talked about Abraham and Melchizedek. Maybe we can go into that a little bit.
So good that we're ending with Christ, because he is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end.
Amen.
So I wondered for a long time why Abraham gave tithe to Melchizedek when it wasn't anything in the law, even because they didn't have the law in Abraham's day yet. And it wasn't anything that Yahweh had mandated for them to do. And there wasn't an example of somebody giving a tithe of spoils or anything. So this is the first recorded instance where we know of a tithe, a tenth being given. Why did he do that? Second question, Abraham had just fought with 318 trained servants under his own roof, had gone in the night, which is the way commandos operate, the way special operators operate under the cover of darkness. In a commando operation, basically, they defeated 4 kingdoms that had come together in an alliance. How did they do that with just 318 and Abraham? And then the next part was, there comes Melchizedek with bread and wine. Melchizedek, who was the king of Salem at that time, which is a city that is not in this world, right? Because he was before, without father or mother, before beginning of days, no beginning of days or end of days. He's a supernatural creation that operates in Salem, which is a city. It's the city that Abraham was looking for, that has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. And he came from that city. So he's operating with his view towards that city. So why does Melchizedek show up with bread and wine? And then why does it say in Hebrews that when Abraham gave tithe, Levi and his generations to come, Jacob and Isaac, why were they there with him when they hadn't even been born yet? Right? Like it talks about these things. So I thought about all this for years and years, and I'm starting to put the pieces together. This is where I'm at right now. The 318 and Abraham add up to 319. which is a 3, a 1, and a 9 that adds up to a 13, which adds up to a 4, which is the door, the Dalet. I believe there was Christ, the door, the facilitator of Abraham's access with his 318 of the arsenal of heaven with weapons of warfare that are not carnal but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds, casting down imaginations, every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God. They were accessing it through the door. And then it was through that door that Melchizedek came and those who came alongside him to see what Abraham would do, as it says in Hebrews. And then Abraham, when he saw Melchizedek, he recognized him as the king of the city he'd been looking for because he came from it and was going to it. And so he gives him tithe to honor him. The tithe was out of honor, which is the first time it's done. And it's done out of honor. It was always meant to be out of honor, not spiritual ticking the boxes to fulfill some spiritual obligation. Not out of coercion, not out of this is the law, you've got to do it. But God did put it in the law because I believe Yahweh was inspired by the way Abraham did that, the way his heart was moved to do that. That's my own opinion. I can't prove that God was inspired by Abraham, but in the relationship we see that they had, I believe he could have been. So that door was Christ. And I believe all supernatural encounter, all supernatural manifestation, and anything we do with the initiative that is outside of the box kind of stuff needs to go through the door. And I will not try to access anything spiritual or heavenly without going through Christ. He is before all things, in him all things consist. He is the head over all principalities and powers. He is our Savior. He's our King. We are kings under the King of Kings. Let's never forget that. And then all things are possible and available and accessible.
So good. Can I just piggyback one little question here? Just your thoughts on trading. You know, people talk about trading, and then some people maybe view it as, hey, I put this thing to get this thing from you. Can you talk about the original intent of trading?
So I'll give you an example. Like when I mentioned earlier that Wisdom's Echo, we do that for free. We don't get paid to do Wisdom's Echo, and nobody solicits offerings or anything like that. And we call it trading because it's a very spontaneous way of giving, where it's like when you go to the market and you see sausages hanging from somebody's stand and you say, I want 2 sausages, I want that piece of apple, and you see something you want for yourself and you choose it. It's kind of like that when we're in an environment where truth is being released and revelation comes, and we all understand that we make a living doing this. And so this is a spontaneous way to honor what is being released, but also to get a hold of something for ourselves. So when somebody listened to that and they traded, like they sent a trade to me, right? To my PayPal, I think it was whatever it was like, or Venmo or something. They sent a trade and they said, I want to trade into overcoming the way you described it because I'm going through something and I need that right now, right? That is their way of actively engaging with what was released, and out of honor for what was released, also latching onto it to say, I want seed in that soil. So sowing, it's like sowing, but I think it has an even greater capacity towards wealth building. And I think sowing takes out the wealth building aspect of it, even though it's a very biblical term to sow and reap. He who sows bountifully will reap bountifully, sow sparingly will reap sparingly. The sower went to the field to sow. I get all that. But trading, even though it's not mentioned specifically in the Bible, is the way by which we will maximize our giving. I found it to be so because it brings in the wealth building component, which is I am a king and I'm walking with the resources that I deploy from my hand, and I'm choosing where they go and what I want them to represent me in. That's what really a trade does. It represents us. What will I trade that represents me? That's the way I ask myself when I'm in situations where something inspires me. So it could be a sticky point for people because of the language, but we've been doing this for so long. We've seen so much fruit from it. I love the spontaneity of it. I love being in meetings where people are getting up and moving every time they hear something. And I also feel that just enables us, the action enables us to put more value on something and to act on it.
Sure.
action of trading. So it's really fun.
No, thank you. Thank you for sharing on that. That makes a lot more sense. I always wondered, just even me personally, watching that unfold. So that's given me a lot more clarity also.
But I also like to say, if people want to see it as so, or I've even been in places and I say, for those of you that don't want to give anything until someone receives an offering, this is your moment. We'll do an offering. You know what I mean? Like, I want to be respectful for everyone and every thought process people have about things. I want to be respectful above all things, because it all counts somehow. And who am I to ostracize someone because they don't see it my way? I don't need to be right. But at the same time, and by the same token, what I've come into by revelation and understanding that bears fruit, I would want to share it and make it practice. And there's fruit in this. Yeah.
So good. Well, guys, there you go. We've had like just under 2 hours of heavy duty, heavy revy, as a friend of mine would say. Yeah. And I can't recommend this enough for you to go. I put the website in the caption. Check out Marius's resources. I guarantee you that there is something that's going to shift your life in there. There's so much in there, but there will be something that will shift your life in there. Thanks. And Marius, I just want to thank you so much for your friendship, for your journey. I honor your record that you're walking out, what you do on the earth, who you are to the body, and who you are to me. And I really do value this friendship. So thank you so much for spending this time with us. And I look forward to more.
Thanks so much. I appreciate the invite. And thanks for these amazing, stimulating questions. And for everyone who's watched us live and those watching the recording, we bless you in the name of the Lord. Shalom.
Amazing. So Marius, you just stay with me for a couple of minutes, but everyone else, we're going to say goodbye and we will see you on the next one.